discussion on fintech, insurance, and inclusion. Satellite applications are playing a significant role in driving innovations and inclusions in the fields of fintech, insurance, and financial inclusions. Satellite-based Earth observations data helps access risk, manage assets, and improve insurance coverage. How can satellite data with a wide field of view be used to further fintech and insurance industries? That will be taken care of as in discussion. I'll leave it to the chair, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Namaskar, welcome all. We are going to touch on important topics, how to include financial inclusion specifically for the agricultural sector. Anything that touches agriculture, I always say it's the world's most important industry, because if it stops working, then we stop eating, and the consequences of that are felt within ours. As it turns out, in India, we heard yesterday that the sector is dominated by a vast number of small landholders. We are marginalized within society. They should not be. One way of being marginalized in your society is to have no access to credit. And so we're going to hit the very specific topic today of agricultural credit and ensuring that that sector meets the requirements of the banking sector. As it turns out, it's a big satellite, geospatial satellite application sector, and I'll turn over the microphone to our two panelists, first of all, for a little presentation on what they do exactly. Then we'll have a discussion which maybe we can broaden a little bit beyond that specific topic to other types of geospatial monitoring that SatSure is doing, and that also of interest to CRISIL. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pushan. I represent CRISIL, which is India's largest credit rating organization. We're part of Standard & Poor's USA. Within this space of assessing risk for agriculture, CRISIL does extensive work. In fact, we work along with partners such as SatSure to assess dynamically what the risk is in lending to farmers. And just to give some context around the challenge at hand, India has about 15 crore farmers. The penetration of formal credit is only to the tune of around 60%. So only about 9 crore farmers are getting access to formal credit. The second part is that if they don't get access to formal credit, which is around at interest of 7%, they will need to go to the informal channels where the interest rates are as high as 36, 48, and even beyond that. And why that is important is because a farmer in India, in a family of 5, is making about 1,20,000 rupees per annum. That number is just, upwards of about $1,000, $1,500 and thereabout per annum in a family of 5. So that person, that family is not really able to afford interest rates as high as 36 and 48%. So that's a challenge to solve, one, for the farmers. From the banking perspective, it's a different challenge to solve, right? India is seeing fast growth in credit to the corporate segment, MSME segment. And as the credit grows in the system, what the RBI, that is the Reserve Bank of India, the regulator has said is that 40% of the annual net banking credit has to be given to the priority sectors, right? And a large part of that needs to go to the small and marginal farmers. Now, out of the 15 crore farm families and land holding that I spoke about, 86% of those are small and marginal, that is those having less than 2 hectares of land. Banks typically are averse to lend to this segment because they are very fragmented. The collection is difficult for this segment. The income levels are very poor, very low, and hence it becomes difficult to get back the money that they would have lent. The NPAs, that is the non-performing assets, the asset quality is quite inferior. But the Reserve Bank of India has said that as the banks grow their book of credit, they need to lend to the small and marginal farmers as well, and a large chunk of the money needs to go to them. So the use case there is that how do we assess risk and opportunities of lending to this small and marginal segment. That's where CRISIL and organizations like SatSure are teaming up to solve the risk and opportunity assessment for farmers. What are the villages out of the 7 lakh plus villages in India, that is 0.7 million, which are the villages that need to be prioritized from a lending perspective so that the banks can meet this target of 40% of annual net banking credit. Finally, from a regulator, so I spoke about farmers, I spoke about the banks. The third important cog in the wheel is the regulator, that is Reserve Bank of India. What the Reserve Bank of India says is that they've identified various districts. There are about 185 districts in India which have less than 6,000 rupees per capita credit. There are over 200 districts, about 205 districts, which have more than 25,000 rupees as per capita credit from priority sectors. Now, in order to incentivize banks to lend to these underpenetrated districts, what the Reserve Bank of India has told to banks is that if you lend to these 185 districts, which have less than 6,000 rupees of per capita credit, we will give you 25% more credit in meeting your priority sector norms. That is, if you lend 100 rupees, we will give you 125 rupees as credit. So it becomes easier for the banks to meet their priority sector lending. So more the reason banks come to us to understand which are the districts where the risks are lower, the opportunities are higher among these 185 districts. And what we do at CRISIL is we use satellite imagery data. We correlate that to how the non-performing assets have behaved historically over the years. We develop risk scores and correlate them to the non-performing assets and help banks take better data-backed decisions in prioritizing districts, villages where they should be lending, as well as deprioritizing some of the districts where we have seen historically the risk scores are very high and the asset quality is also poor. We do that by way of, at CRISIL we cover about 36 crops across 16 states. That covers more than 85% of the crop production in the country. So a large part of the crops are covered. We track prices across 2,000 mandis, that is markets in India. And that helps us understand what is the income that the farmer is generating, because we track both the crop prices as well as the cost of cultivation, which helps us understand the income of the farmers in these micro markets, that is villages and districts. And that's how we develop our risk scores broadly. So with that, I'll pause here and I'll hand it over to my colleague Amit.
Thank you, Pushan. I represent SatSure. We are a deep tech company. We work primarily within the space tech space, and we offer insights to various sectors, banking being one of them. We work also within the space of infrastructure and within the agri. Now, satellite data has been existing for more than 2 decades, but over time what we have started realizing is any organization, any institution that satellite imaging is trying to cater to, it is not the data but the insights which are of prime importance. A lot of decisions institutions have to take which go beyond the simplified form of data as a category. What SatSure specializes is creating those value-add insights within various sectors, especially from a banking point of view. So as Pushan was mentioning, we have close to 15 crore farmers in India, and about 9 crore of them have a financial penetration. So that leaves a larger chunk of farmers who yet not have access to formal credit. Now, how can an organization like SatSure solve that problem? And that's where, along with partners like CRISIL, we work collectively to create something called as risk ranking scores, where the intent is that we give data sets which are looked from a formal capacity point of view. Any institution today, while working for any kind of product across geographies, especially banks, have good amount of intent data. But when you look at agriculture, today about 40% of farmers do not have a formal rating itself. Typically all of us have something called as a CIBIL or a CRIF score. So when we walk into a financial institution, the bank knows what is our score. Typically basis that they would offer us a certain loan product. But when it comes to agriculture, that has been one of their biggest challenges. So where SatSure tries to bring insights is an alternative data set, which is a capacity of a particular location. So if I know where the farm is, thanks to the digitization initiative taken by Government of India, close to 7 states, something called as cadastral maps exist. Typically, the 4 boundaries of a farm exist. So today we can pinpoint and tell an institution that how a particular farm owned by a farmer has performed over a period of last 3 years or 6 seasons, giving an alternative data set while reviewing an NTC customer, new to credit, or somebody who doesn't have a intent score or a CIBIL or a CRIF score. What we also do with organizations like CRISIL is we have certain risk ranking scores that we have created. We marry it with lot of substantial data which CRISIL owns, and we try to do a risk order ranking for financial institutions. This also gives them an incentive to go beyond the traditional way of financing. So that's where SatSure has been playing a very important role for past 3.5 years. For whatever minimal work we have been able to create as an impact on the ground. Today, I'm very proud to say that we are the first space tech company in India who has been funded, or I would say have investors, the likes of HDFC, the likes of ICICI, or the likes of Kotak, have invested into us with an intent to make this as a large-scale use case beyond India and try to target Southeast Asia on primary front. So this is SatSure. Thank you.
Turn this on. Can we have a microphone for Pushan as well, so you guys don't have to fight for it? Okay, let me, very good introduction, thank you. Let me try and size the, get an idea of the size of this already, because you've said 36% of farmers are unrated, right? So that means 64% are rated. That's already a lot of people. Is it all done with geospatial monitoring or absent satellite data? How do you do this?
So basically what happens is the data has been existing for more than 2 decades, as I was mentioning. The insights were missing for a very long time. Today, again, because of digitization that has happened and we understanding the psychology of the industry that we work with, we have been able to create a lot of capacity-based data. So when I say capacity-based data, there are very simple questions to be answered for any farmer that exists in India from a lending perspective. Basically, is his farm irrigated or non-irrigated? How many times a particular farmer who is doing farming in his land does farming as a process? He does farming once a year, he does it twice a year, he does it thrice a year, something which the industry from a banking perspective considers it as cropping intensity. What kind of crops they have been growing? So as Pushan was mentioning, there are certain number of standing crops that exist in India, which today 70% have an exposure from a banking point of view. So is the farmer growing the same crop or is it different crop that we are looking at? Now all these data sets are today getting structured and available for consumption. So these 34% of people who do not have access to credit because they have not been a part of the formal lending process, as well as the documentation of their money transaction is missing. These are guys who still have a cash-based transaction. Since they come from a lower income capacity, it's not something that they do not want to afford of not having a bank account, but typically the average, as Pushan was mentioning, the average income is 1,20,000 across 5 people over a year. So it's a penny transaction that is happening. And hence, since it's not recorded, this is the alternative data set that we are trying to bring into the market.
And the parameters that you take into account in doing those credits. So there's what crop they are growing. Is that crop exposed to particular market or I guess environmental risk at that point in time? That where they are, is it that location at risk for whatever reason? And probably also there's how good the farmer is at doing his job. And purely from a credit perspective, the guy is spending too much or whatever. It's all individual stories. So you need to have, every one of them has a personal profile. Or to what extent are those ratings generalized?
So basically what happens is we don't create personal profiles of the farmer. We typically create a capacity-based data of a particular land, where the whole intent, as you rightly mentioned, is what crops are being grown, how the land has been performing over a period of time. So Government of India gives an association of that particular capacity with the ownership details. So it's an indirect link saying that who owns the land. Typically that's how he has been performing as a farming as a practice. The ancillary data that is of much more importance comes from partners like CRISIL. So while SatSure is able to give every information as far as the capacity of that particular land is, thanks to CRISIL, we are able to give a further important data, which is what is the potential income that a farmer may have if he is doing a particular crop in a particular area. What is the risk associated in that particular crop from a geospatial and a geographic dynamics. So when we say geospatial, we can typically say how good or bad that particular crop has performed in a particular season because of the climate change effect. But I mean, Pushan will definitely do a little bit deep diving in that, is where that particular crop, what kind of geographical impact it has on a farmer, the price fluctuation that may incur because of certain stands taken by Government of India, or because of certain norms being set both nationally and internationally. Now that kind of risk ranking score that happens adds the value where it entices a financial institution to better gauge the risk and take a confirmed decision while engaging with a farmer or group of farmers.
So maybe mainly for Pushan, but that gives you a holistic view of how the agricultural sector is doing. How's the risk profile right now? Which way is it going? Is it generally going up because of water stress, whatever reasons? Is it improving because at the same time there's weapons that can be deployed against that, better targeted seeds, targeted entrants? We have to be careful with that stuff. But what's the trend generally?
Right. So I'll talk about that, and then maybe I'll revisit the aspects that Amit was talking about. But to answer your question, in terms of the risk profile, what we see was in fiscal 15-16, and that's from a period of April to March is a fiscal year in India. About during fiscal 15-16, our non-performing assets in agriculture were to the tune of around 5%. By fiscal 2021, it had reached about 10%.
Wow.
Right? So that's doubling. But then successively in fiscal 22 and fiscal 23, we're seeing that coming down.
Why did it double?
Right. The reason for that is that in India, a lot depends on how the monsoon is. We have only slightly above 50% of our land is irrigated. Right, so the remaining land is dependent on how the monsoon situation is. We had droughts in the year 2014, in the year 2015. That has a lingering impact on the ability of farmers to pay. That's point number one. Point number two is we had a lot of loan waivers during the year 2018, and that's more on the political considerations. You have state elections, you have central elections, and also you have these droughts which diminish the ability of the farmers to pay back. So there is a need. That sort of disrupts the credit discipline, right? If there's a loan waiver announced in state A, state B, which is a neighboring state, also tends to not repay because they feel that there might be a loan waiver. Right, so that credit discipline disruption happened around 2018. So these are two of the key reasons why the credit discipline deteriorated.
And then things improved.
Right. Now the improvement is because if you see any 5-year period in India, typically we have 2 monsoon seasons which are below normal. and 3 which are either normal or above normal. But if we look at the last 5 monsoon seasons, we've had only one season which was below normal in the year 2018-19, where we received 9% below the long period average rainfall. Otherwise, in all the other years, we've received excessive rainfall. So the rainfall situation has been good. 50% of the land that depends on irrigation, that has done well. That's one reason. The second reason is that the commodity boom that we saw over the last 2 years, which impacted hard commodities like steel, aluminium, lithium, so many others, that also percolated to agriculture. So you saw the prices of wheat going through the roof, you saw prices of pulses, edible oil, all of that shooting up. That has also benefited farmers to some extent. I wouldn't say a very, very large extent, but to some extent that money has percolated, improving the credit discipline.
So that's reassuring. The long-term trend right now is an improvement.
That is right.
Despite everything that we read on water stress, aquifers being depleted in India, so on, in the agricultural sector at least, they're on the right side of the weather trend.
Right. So there is improvement, but while there is improvement, it's basically from 10% we're going to somewhere around 8.5%. That level of improvement. But the challenge is how do we reach the 40% farmers as well, who are unbanked today, and how do we take better decisions for this 60% so that 8.5 goes down below, say, around 6%.
What we heard yesterday in the agricultural panel, a lot of it was on weather risks, and the takeaway from that was that most of the farmers are completely in the dark. They have no idea what's going to happen. They have no idea what the weather is going to be like. As a result, I guess they have no idea what crops they should sow next year if they change. Never mind what kind of seed they would be using. They get offers from, I guess, the seed industry and take this one, no take this one, and it's very hard to make decisions as a result. How much uncertainty is there in those ratings, in the decisions that they have to make? Right now, things are going in the right direction, but it could reverse, right? In agriculture, risk is omnipresent. You can be in money this year and poor next year. Is the uncertainty increasing? Is the problem as bad as the weather forecasters made it sound yesterday?
Maybe I'll go first, and Amit, you could add subsequently. The uncertainties, I would say, have always been high, right? I mean, the more you track, the more you realize there is uncertainty, but the uncertainty has always been there in the system. In India, and maybe in many other geographies across the world as well, unfortunately, the farmer is doing a rear view assessment. He's looking at the previous season, or she's looking at the previous season, to understand how the income has been for a particular crop in the previous season, and then taking a decision going forward. Typically, we don't see too much of crop shifts happening. So, a farmer typically decides between 1 or 2 crops. There's not too much change that happens. There are other cues as well that are given to a farmer to decide which crop he needs or she needs to go for. Something like minimum support price, which is the minimum price at which he or she can sell the crop in the market, which is decided by the government of India for 23 crops. So there is, while 23 crops have a minimum support price associated with them, typically procurement takes place meaningfully only for about 3 to 4 crops, that is paddy, wheat, cotton to some extent, sugarcane as well, right? So these are some of the cues that farmers are picking in deciding which crops that they should be going for. But from a weather perspective, there needs to be much more information being made available to the farmers as to how the water stress is likely to be this season, in not just the overall aggregated rainfall. Like we talk about, rainfall this year is going to be normal, and how that is calculated is June, July, August, September, the cumulative amount that we receive in a long period average. But for a farmer, it needs to rain in the crucial sowing period. It should not rain during the harvest period. We might have a normal rainfall, like 1% surplus, but if it rains excessively in September and does not rain in June and July, that's quite detrimental to the farmer. So these micro information need to be made available to the farmer. Luckily, India has extremely good smartphone penetration, digital penetration, and this can be pushed to the farmers. So we have, in many cases, the infrastructure of the last mile connectivity doesn't exist. In this case, we have that last mile connectivity available. We need to get more accurate information, and that needs to be pushed to the farmers, and that will enable better decision making.
Amit, it's nice to have in situ sensors, of course. We heard yesterday through that there's a lot of farmers who only have a feature phone, and so they can't they can't run those applications. Somebody would have to go in there and put the sensors. Using purely geospatial tools, how much granularity do you get? You go down to field level, or do you have to aggregate it?
Okay, so when we say geospatial data, obviously I am dependent upon what kind of imagery I am working on. So today, for any project to be viable in India, we depend a lot on open source information being made available to us.
Which is Sentinel data?
Exactly. So Sentinel data is something that organizations like SatSure work on. The limitation that they carry with them is typically they offer a 10-meter resolution information data set for us, which is typically a 10 by 10 meter tile, or if I have to further synthesize it or make it very simple, typically a 1 acre of land will give me around 40 tiles to analyze from. But the biggest challenge, as Pushan was mentioning at the start, is India is a country for large and marginal farmers. I mean, typically the land parcel would be less than 1 acre, or in fact an average is 2 hectare, 1.5 acre. And what is very interesting is typically farmers would do multi-cropping in those particular area. Now, from a geospatial perspective, analyzing and giving a detailed insight does become challenging. That is one problem that SatSure is also trying to solve, and which was of very much interest for our investors, where we are saying that we will be launching our own satellites, so our dependability on international data sets kind of gets eliminated. From 10-meter resolution, I will own my own data set of 1-meter resolution, so I can do a better risk assessment at my side, as well as look at providing insights to the consumers, maybe a bank as well as the farmer.
Is there any particular ISRO satellite that you're especially waiting for that?
So basically, yes, we consume a lot of data sets that are provided by ISRO also. I would not say a particular satellite as such, but it's a mix of information, because that's what helps us get those insights out of.
But today you need the resolution. So 10 meters is too big for the farms that working on. You need the right spectral bands.
Exactly.
You said you're tracking 36 crops, so maybe it's not just the usual 5 bands. In some cases, you might need specialized indices for particular crops,
exactly.
And you need pixel quality also.
So that's where SatSure took a conscious decision about 2 years back and decided to have its own satellite. So we have a cell phone subsidy, which is Kaleido, which is launching its own payloads. The whole intent is how granular I can make this information, as rightly mentioned, the resolution coming from 10 meters to 1 meter, how I can increase my bands that I'm analyzing data for. So beyond the optical images that we are procuring right now, can I add few more images or bands on my side, which will help me distinguish not only between the standing 26 crops that we are working on, but also help me look at other ancillary crops which are small, for example, differentiating between a shrub and a horticulture crop, maybe clearly identifying that whether this is a weed or a tomato. Now, these kind of capabilities we are trying to build in within our ecosystem. Obviously, it will not happen overnight, but the learning that has gone into creating these insights, both at the bank side and the farmer side, are the base for us to develop our own constellation.
And what's the status on Kaleido today?
Sorry?
What's the status today on Kaleido, on that project?
On Kaleido, so basically...
When are you launching? What are you launching?
So basically, we have already created our own patented payload. It is already under a test phase at our side. Hopefully, we look forward to launch it somewhere in mid 2025. It's a constellation of around 4 satellites. Fifth one is just a backup that we are sending in case if anything goes wrong in one of them. But the whole intent is we get a geographic coverage of around 55% of world. One of the challenges that Sentinel today also has is the frequency of images that I get. It's typically 7 to 10 days in a month. That kind of gets eliminated because we are looking at approximately 3 to 5 days frequency. So I'll be able to give much more granular and frequent insights from my side. So the payload is, yes, designed, it's been tested. Hopefully, if everything works fine, by 2025, we will have our first payload in space, giving us the data from space.
Pushan, you're the user for those data. Are you happy with the data quality, or how often is it, do you still need ground truth? How much, and agriculture is a complicated thing also. I was told once by an agronomist, my beets, the guy was in sugar beet, was a sugar beet specialist. A sugar beet is way more complicated than any of your satellites. And at the molecular level where things matter, yes, the sugar beet is a complicated thing like any living matter. So the satellite data is not all that you consume. You also depend on agronomists to interpret what's going on in the field, on field level data, in situ, a million different sources. You get what you need generally in terms of data. What you still have is there's still some guesswork in what you do.
Right. So excellent question. I think, as satellite imagery is being utilized more and more, and there's more artificial intelligence and machine learning being put in place, the quality of data is improving. If you look at the cropping landscape in India, 85% of our crops are field crops, right? Crops like paddy, wheat, pulses, oil seeds. 15% are horticulture crops, fruits and vegetables. If we look at risk assessment, the risks of these two are very different, right? There's a lot of volatility when it comes to horticulture crops, that is fruits and vegetables. There could be a lot of post-harvest losses for a crop like tomato. You could have an excellent crop, and if it rains, it could damage the crop immensely. You could have excellent flowering season for the mango crop, and then if it's too windy, the flowers can sort of drop. So the volatility is very different. The income profiles are also very different. If you're earning 100 rupees on a field crop, the earning by rule of thumb on a horticulture crop could be 400 to 500 rupees, right? So while the income is high, the volatility is also very high. And hence the risks need to be assessed very differently for these two segments. Now, while we get excellent results for some of the popular crops in India, which is paddy, wheat, some of the pulses, the same can't be said for horticulture crops, right? Because something like a tomato, it's a shrub, right? How do you distinguish between that and a weed? So there is a lot of headroom for improvement, and which is where we believe that when there is better quality of imagery with these satellites that SatSure is launching and other players are launching, we would get access to even more granular and better imagery. Multispectrometer is, imagery is something that is being used today. Hyperspectrometry has a lot of potential to give us a lot of insightful
only
information.
Potential still.
Right.
So why? Because there's a lot of effort has been thrown at hyperspectral. What's still missing there?
Right. In terms of the quality of the images, I think we've still not got the inputs, at least for us, in terms of these images. We only hear a lot about the potential in terms of them being able to tell us about the nitrogen, the chlorophyll content, but it remains to be seen how the quality of the images is. Maybe Amit could talk about the challenges in, maybe it's the cost associated with hyperspectrometry that is very high, but we're not at least getting the inputs today yet. But we understand that in the coming years that will be available, and that could really give us more nuanced information for better credit.
The hyperspectral is one of those technologies that the revolution was always 5 years from now. And so Amit, are you going in that direction, or you're launching in 2 years?
So basically what happens is, as in the introduction part I mentioned, we work beyond agriculture, and for SatSure or any other company which is in this space, commercial viability and the differentiation between good to have and must to have is very, very, very clear. As rightly mentioned, hyperspectral has a good potential to answer a lot of questions, but it is still something which is at a test phase. Optical has already done its work. Sentinel has been there for a very long time. It has helped resolve a lot of issues on ground, and today it has made, in fact, a lot of things commercially viable. I mean, the whole reason we are supporting the banking industry is because of the technology that is pre-existing, tested, and things like that. One more value add that we also see between the tech that we are launching now and the hyperspectral that would coexist is you need a lot of data, and you need data coming from different forms. The whole psychology is I cannot do everything by myself. Satellite data has been existing for 2 decades, and one of the important pain points of NPA or the credit not available to new to credit customers. Now these all are not resolved purely by an organization like SatSure. We have to marry our data with CRISIL data, because that's the clear insight that is helping institutions to take informed decision. So what we see is what we are launching in next 2 years is trying to solve the immediate problems that pre-exist with a lot of cost control to happen on it. And we parallelly look at hyperspectral data coming in, analyzing and trying to see what further delta it is trying to bring within the industry. As I was mentioning, good to have and must to have. Today's problem is something that we know the Kaleido is launching and trying to resolve. Hyperspectral is already there. In fact, we are kind of happy about it because we believe equally in research. So hopefully in next 3 to 4 years, both the ones Kaleido that is launching from an optical space and hyperspectral will be able to marry a lot of data with what pre-exists with CRISIL and give much more granular information. Like one of the important questions that you had asked is a lot of farmers in India are still dependent on, the larger impact is always climate. Now how I can bring that climate risk lower by giving these ancillary data sets will make will help farmers to make a lot of informed decision on ground.
Is there any crop that presents particularly intractable problems where you wish the research community would, I've read about rice, for instance. Rice apparently it's a difficult crop to track because there's a lot going on under the water, right? So nobody can see it. I've seen peppers saying with radar, with SAR, we can actually see when the crop starts shooting through the water, and maybe we can use that. There's entire conferences on remote sensing of rice. It's a big issue in India. It's a massive issue in Thailand as well, where every year there's a big subsidy coming into all the rice paddies. The government is buying an entire satellite largely to feed that mechanism with data. Any crops particularly, any problems with rice?
So I would not say there are problems with crop particularly. It is typically standing crops we haven't had much of a challenge. It's also the end consumer what they are looking at. Like for example in India it's very standardized. There are priority sector lending targets, and at a state level you have the state level banking committee which typically decides a particular funding amount basis cost of cultivation that they would have calculated at our end. So financial institutions will not say that a farmer because he is doing A crop and B crop, what should be my funding to him. They already know what is the calculation that they could look at a year around for this particular farmer to be funded on to. Because that's the use case that we are trying to solve. Input industry is very critical on that part, where they not only want to know the crop that the farmer is growing, they are looking at insights which go beyond the crops. Maybe soil, nutrition is something that they are trying to look as a problem to be solved. Within crops, they are looking at varieties to be solved, something that we specifically have not been able to achieve for a very long time, not only in India but entire Southeast Asia or globally, is horticulture as a crop, because it's a short duration crop. Its signatures get mixed up with lot of other crops. So horticulture is something that we have taken as a priority to work on, because if you look at India as a country, 15% of crop dependency is still on horticulture.
A good point on mixed crops, by the way. So, because if I mixed crops are good for soil. It's a good ecological practice, actually. We don't want vast monocultures, which is what the big agricultural countries tend to have. But if I'm mixing my crops, then they are become more difficult to characterize, and it could complicate my credit rating. Can you
exactly, that's what happens with us also. I mean, you're looking at a farmer who may own 1 acre of farm, and we have 10 by 10 meter image resolution, and I can't teach my machine to try and identify 2 crops in one particular pixel, or more than 2 crops. Now that's where things become complicated. That's where we get false positive.
But can you break that problem and help me grow my mixed crops without being penalized then?
That's exactly what Kaleido is trying to achieve. Where using 1 meter resolution, I am able to actually synthesize much more data. So I can have 10 more pixels within that same pixel that I was analyzing earlier, and try to give much more granular information. So mixed cropping is also encouraged. Maybe insights to the farmer on the mixed cropping that they are doing, looking at 2 different crop signatures, can also be given as a data set. And last but not the least, from an institution's perspective, we go with a much more granular information saying that yes, this farmer is doing a crop which is of your interest, but he has other crops that he is growing, which is also adding to the source of income.
We'll move on to some of the economic and policy implications of what you're doing. But before we do that, anybody who wants to join in a discussion with questions or comments, please. There's a massive pent-up demand. Can we run microphones to all these raised hands? Yeah, the gentleman in green was the first one to raise his hand.
Thank you. Yeah, nice discussion. It was great. So what I'm saying is, because I do have some village background. I was born in a village and I've seen for quite a long time. And a lot of village, I mean, the farmers and the poor farmers that you are talking, they are still governed by FOMO and fear of missing out, and a very strong bias. Okay, and it's very organic in nature. Government is trying from last 75 years, that is to eliminate, that is there. So, I mean, I just want to understand, when you try to calculate risk, do you do before sowing the crop or after sowing the crop? Because when the crop is sown, and let's say if you're trying to see, like right now, recently, so I'm coming from Bangalore, like in Bangalore, tomato prices are out of the roof. And you will be knowing, right? And the thing is, what will happen next year, that a lot of farmers are going to grow tomatoes, and the tomato prices will fall flat, right? And they will not be even able to get to the returns. So the thing is, if you try to calculate risk and you try to see how many tomatoes are grown in that area, now to get up to that data, if you are calculating risk before sowing, or let's say just after sowing, because lot of other areas are not yet sown. Like that. So how do you do that part? The first question. Second, just one more question is, like when you say mixed crop, with the high resolution data. So I think, like even with 1 meter data, you can't see a single crop. That is it, right? So the spectral information is still going to be the same. So how you are, working towards? I mean, what's what's in your mind that it will solve that?
So I'll take the risk assessment part, and Amit, you could talk about the second part. When we're looking at risk, we're not looking at just risk pre-sowing. What we do is we look at a trend, and with satellite imagery, you get a trend of information for the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, right? Agreed that if there is tomato price escalation, farmers might switch to that crop. But if you look at the switching at a pan-India level, It's not that a paddy farmer will start switching to tomato, right? Farmers typically tend to switch between one or two crops. If they have prior experience of doing tomato, then only would they really go into tomato, because the most risk-averse person, much more than the bank, is the farmer. Because the farmer, we realize that he's making only 2,000 rupees per person per month, right? That's barely any income for him to take or her to take risk. If he or she goes wrong, it's a sustenance question, right? So they are very, very risk averse. So the switching between crops is not very, very meaningful. So what we do is we look at the historic trend in terms of the 3 to 5 years, how the sowing has been, the production has been, looking at production, relating it to the prices, and now with the new sowing information, new yield information, we have a view on the production and the prices as well, right? So that informs our credit risk models in terms of taking better credit risk decisions for the bankers. But for the farmer's perspective, there needs to be other models, right, that needs to be built for the farmers, and that needs to be given to them, that they are able to take better decisions in terms of what should they sow amongst the 1 or 2 choices that they have. Our risk solutions today are not really being given to the farmers, and that's because the paying ability is not there, and we don't believe that that ability will come directly at a B2C level. It has to be enabled through some channel, whether it's the regulator, banker, or the government. Right, Amit?
So see, basically, I'll just add some more part on the risk part. There are 2 risk categorizations we typically look at. One is the historic performance. So anything that would have happened for past 3 years, 6 seasons is substantial information for making a sound decision while engaging for any institution while engaging with a particular set of farmer or a group of farmers. That's your past historic score. So like we have our credit scores. Typically you would, any CIBIL or CRIF or any bureau score is historic performance of yours. Then there is something called as an in-season score. Now this typically is a score which tries to monitor a particular portfolio over a period of time, typically a season. So, and this when married with a lot of ancillary data. I mean, Pushan has not been able to take that particular point because of the ongoing conversation. Now, for example, while the prices of tomato have gone up, there have been point in times where the prices of wheat would have gone up, but due to regulatory constraints, they were being controlled. While they did breach a certain benchmark, but they could not go beyond an aspect. Now that's a risk that is in season for a farmer. Should I hold it? Should I not hold it? Should I bring it into the market? I may get the best price. I wait for another 2 months, then what happens? Now that's a data that has to be given on timely periodic basis, so that right from season and post season and before the season, certain people take informed decisions. For a financial institution, it is historic information which is of importance. Once they lend, then it is from a collections point of view what is happening on the ground. For a farmer, it's more informed decision whether I hold a crop, I should not hold a crop, or things like that. That's a different issue, that this granularity of information never reaches a farmer. But there are a lot of progressive farmers who do consume those kind of insights, or institutions do consume those kind of insights. Coming on the spectral side, whether it is 10-meter resolution or 1-meter resolution, see, the whole idea is spectrally not things would change. But from a machine learning or an AI perspective, I get much more granular information. Let's assume there are 2 crops in 10-meter resolution, and my system is trying to analyze them. What it does is it tries to look at the signature which is much more stronger versus the other one in a simplest form. So what it'll say is that, okay, this entire field is pure paddy, nothing else. Now that's I would say it's a false positive, because there is something else. But what the machine did was, in that 10-meter resolution, because it was a larger block, it ended up saying everything is paddy. Okay, but there was another crop. But when it moves to 1-meter resolution, the machine has much more granular information. Instead of 40 pixels, it now has more than 400 or 4,000 pixels, which is telling them that in that one particular acre of land or in that particular village, this is the actual disperse of that particular land. So as I was coming back to this very critical information, that whether the farming is doing 2 crops or not. Today probably I'll give a false positive answer saying that he does primarily paddy, but I'm not sure what he may do otherwise else. I am not able to confirm that what is a percentage share of paddy versus some other crop that he is doing on the same field. because I just have boundaries. Today that 1 meter resolution will give me an informed decision to go back saying that 80% is paddy, 20% is something that I may not be able to detect, or I am going back and saying yes, because I have worked a lot, I am able to differentiate what's the next crop. So the idea is to bring in much more data to give an informed risk score versus what is happening now, which obviously will happen with time. I hope I was able to answer your question. Yes.
And anyway, the signature is never pure, right? Because even if there is only one crop, you're also picking up the signal from the soil itself, which can be anything, almost. But Amit, you're not providing prescriptions to farmers anyway. You're only talking to the credit guys, right?
Exactly. See, what happens is, a very well point taken by Pushan was the capacity to pay. Today, farmers have lot of dispersed information. They get data from private sector organizations who give weather data. Then there is data that is given by IMD. The granularity of information is yet not been able to consume by that farmer. I mean, today on this platform, I'm very proud to say that CRISIL brings a lot of granular information for us beyond the spatial data. Like, for example, an impact of any norms that have been set by Government of India or internationally when it comes to a specific crop. Now, those kind of data sets are not something available with us. But as you rightly mentioned, like prices of tomato have reached rooftop. Now, what should be the farmer's next step at a regional level, not at an individual farm level, beyond SatSure? Because SatSure is looking at previous data and trying to make a hypothesis of the current state. CRISIL is somebody who has done this complete analysis, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they would also come at that the future prices that may look at, what is going to affect in terms of policy point of view. This, when dispersed as an information to a certain group, which will become much more valuable beyond what we are trying to bring across as an information.
Let me defend the farmers also a little bit, because sometimes in those conferences you get the impression that those guys are stupid. They need data. If you grow tomatoes all your life, you know a bit about tomatoes, arguably, and more than your banker. Agriculture is, and it's having waded into a few paddies myself, it's too technical for me. Huh? There's a lot of things you need to understand to manage your crops. We had additional questions. So the gentleman in the tie, I think you were historically second. Then we move on to Gagan and...
Hello, yeah. My question actually, what I wanted, he has already brought out this things actually. But yes, to add to it, I just wanted to know once, like say garlic, I'll just take because I belong to Haryana, so I see these farmers going. So at a time, the garlic prices were quite high. So next time what happened, everybody grew garlic only. And then there was surplus garlic in every home and the price plummeted down. So what I want to know, this data, when you capture the data, can in any way be given back to the farmers, saying that, okay, now this percentage of land garlic sowing already has been done. So now you take your known decision, you want to go for garlic or you want to go for some other crop.
Absolutely. So that is something that's absolutely critical, that's required. Macro level information availability. Because while the farmer may be technically an expert in growing garlic, he may not know that in his village he knows how many people have grown. Maybe also in the neighboring village, but what about the entire district? What about the entire state? What about the next state? And different states go for sowing at a different time, right? So that macro availability of information is there that needs to be channelized to the farmer. And it's not just about garlic, it's about what are the other commodities, right, which are in short supply. What are the commodities? Say for example, this year Argentina is going through a drought. And that's the third successive year that they're going to go for a drought. Soybean production, a large chunk of India's soybean imports are from Argentina. We import about 60% of our soybean requirement from Argentina, about 30% from Brazil. Brazil is going to have an excess production. Argentina is going to have a decline in production. Madhya Pradesh produces 60% of the soybean in India. Can a cue be given to Madhya Pradesh to actually grow more soybean, because there is opportunity not just to serve the Indian market, but maybe some other neighboring states as well, right? So these are the cues that need to be given that, okay, and incidentally, Madhya Pradesh also is a large garlic producer. 63% of India's garlic is actually produced in Madhya Pradesh, right? So if we're expecting garlic prices to go down, soybean prices to go up, those cues can be given. The idea is that how do you channelize this information, which is, has a value proposition also for an organization that is going to give this information, which is going to incur significant cost in assessing all of these data parameters and providing that output. The farmer does not have the ability to pay for this, right? So there need to be other organizations, maybe a banker who's given credit to farmers because there is interest in the banker to recover the money, so he could provide this information, or it could be the insurance players or the government agencies, right? So there need to be some players in the ecosystem who have some skin in the game, who have the interest of informing the farmer, who could bear the cost burden that an organization who's going to do this assessment will incur, right? And that's how the information can be channelized. But yes, there is definitely a need to channelize this information forward-looking rather than looking behind.
My own experience in the countryside in emergent markets is not in India, but in a country not far from here that has more or less the same terrain. The number one conversation topic when getting into a village and people get to ask you some questions, the number one thing they are interested in is not football, not the Olympics. It's how much can I sell my crop for? Where should I go? What should I sow next year? That's number one. But look, if you're running steel mills or you're producing lithium or anything, you have that information. And, but if you don't have it, you're also desperate for it, right? Gagan?
Just before that, if I could,
Go
just
ahead,
add,
while the microphone goes to our colleague
in a
here.
minute, the challenge with farming and the crop side also is that, this is a staple, right? You need to produce paddy. There's a lot of consumption base, and the government wants to sort of tackle inflation at the same time. In case of car production, right, there's no one who really puts a curb on this is the price, you can't go beyond. But when it comes to tomato prices, since it starts hurting our expenses on a daily basis, there are curbs put in place. You can't export anymore. You can't go beyond a certain price. So that's again a place where the farmer suffers. It's not really a free economy when it comes to crops, unlike steel or cement or even cars.
In your case, the additional credit that you can provide, does that replace in any event state subsidies?
So the credit is actually decided by the district level technical committee, gives a recommendation as to how much can you disburse for this particular crop for this particular district, right? That's what actually determines technically how much the bank can disburse. The subsidies don't really,
So there's no transfer here from tax to the banking sector.
There is subsidy that is provided, definitely across the board, but that's not part of the credit calculation.
Okay. Gagan?
Yeah. Hi, Pushan. So I have two questions. Number one, we touched a lot about dissemination of data. What are the current mechanisms that you follow to disperse this data, and how granular can you do it? Is it on a district level? Is it on a gram panchayat level? And mechanisms. The second part question is, what are the current gaps in the data you see that you're not getting but you'd like to get it, either from satellite, either from terrestrial or other sources?
Great, excellent two questions. So the first part, how do we do it, until what granularity? We look at historical trends and correlate that with the non-performing assets, right? To understand whether our risk scores are talking to the reality. So we follow those historical parameters and we build correlations. How granular can we go? As granular as the input, that is the satellite imagery is. If data is available for the latitude, longitude of the farmer, we can develop risk scores at the farmer level. While there is a lot of digitization that has happened, the cadastral maps are not really available across the board, right? So that's a challenge. Coming to what are the gaps that we see today and what would we like to see? Better like Amit and I were talking about it, more information on the horticulture side, because the risk profiles are very different on the field as well as the horticulture. So more information on the horticulture side. The second part, which we've sort of only briefly touched upon, is one is the ability to pay. The second is the willingness to pay, right? All of this assessment that we do talks about the ability to pay. How much income do I have, so can I pay or not? But what about willingness to pay, right? If there is a loan waiver that has been announced, there might be a farmer who has the ability but not the willingness. We see some of the, if you look at the per hectare income, Punjab has extremely high income at a per hectare level, but also the non-performing assets in Punjab are really high. So the willingness to pay is something that needs to be dealt with. We already have a plan in place for that. There are psychographic assessments that you can do. There are correlations of multiple non-quantitative things that show correlation on the willingness to pay. So that's how we tackle that problem.
Wonderful. Just to touch upon my first question, like how robust is the mechanism of getting that data to the farmer? Like, is there a government process in place where you say, and touching on the earlier questions, all right, there is plenty of garlic, but we need much more soya bean. Is there a mechanism to transfer this information? If not to the end level, until what level does it go as of today?
As of today, there's no mechanism to actually do that. This is only wishful, I would say, right. That there is a need for this, but there is no mechanism. There is, what I'm talking about also, this last mile of information to the farmer, it's not modeled today, right? That which are the crop combinations. So like I spoke about garlic and soybean both being crops in Madhya Pradesh. How much area is under garlic? If 1% of shift happens from garlic to soybean, it does not mean that 1%, I mean that direct shift to soybean, because there might be just 100 hectares in garlic and 2,000 hectares in soybean. So even if all of the 100 hectares shifts to soybean, there's barely any meaningful tilt that you can do on soybean, right? From, I mean, 100 hectares from garlic to soybean. So all of that has not been done. So it's really, it remains to be done and seen how that can happen.
It becomes a telecom question, actually. We have questions from the gentleman in the second row who's been very patient with us. And then we'll have to start wrapping this up.
Thank you very much, sir. And see, I have two questions. One is that, as was asked by Gagan, that you don't have a mechanism on the ground. You look it from the sky, and you don't have a mechanism on the ground, because the farmer community is well knit, and one can collect data from the ground level as well. So there is no mechanism, or is there any mechanism? That is one. The other is when you do the costing of the agro products and the produce, if you really do a good costing, it is always a loss-making proposition if you take away the subsidies and all of that. And therefore, when you advise the bankers for a credit line and so on, I give you the example of the cotton growers, the suicide, and a whole lot of things happen. Is there a mechanism which you define for the restructuring of the debt? Or is it that the loan shark go and start hounding him so much that he commits suicide? So what is the mechanism in that respect? Thank you.
Right. Again, two excellent questions, right? One being on the mechanism, and I'll dwell deeper on that. So one is the satellite imagery part, but it's not restricted only to satellite imagery. Traditionally, we've been talking to a lot of farmers on ground. So I mentioned that we cover 36 crops across 16 states. We speak to a lot of farmers to understand really what the ground truth is. So when we look at new satellite imagery data and it shows that there is a 3% excess sowing that's going to happen on wheat, we check with farmer producer organization. A farmer producer organization could be engaged with say 300 to 1,000 farmers, and we'll check with multiple such farmer producer organizations. To ground truth this data, we check with seed manufacturers, right? So crops which have a good seed replacement rate, especially say crops like cotton, we can get ground truthing from seed manufacturers, whether really they are seeing that shift in their sales. So we don't take the data at face value. We do ground truthing to be sure that what we are doing is finally speaking to the reality on the ground. Of course, there can be more robustness built around this in terms of ground truthing, because we're talking about 15 crore farmers, right? And we'll be doing some 1,000 odd plus testing at the state level. Coming to the second part of the debt restructuring, right? The government does, what the government does is, they announce loan waivers many times to alleviate the stress on the farmers. But where we see, and that's where this panel is about financial inclusion, right? And that's where we see solutions like risk assessment at the farmer level are so critical that banks go to the unbanked customers. They are today wary of just venturing into a region because they feel that, okay, we don't have feet on the street, maybe we won't be able to collect them collect money from the farmers, so they just don't venture there. But when we show to them that, okay, listen, you're lending in Maharashtra, which has a certain risk profile. You're not today lending in Arunachal Pradesh, but the risk profile in Arunachal Pradesh is even better than where you're lending today and have a good experience. So why don't you set up something there? Now, people there might be looking at money lenders, right, where the interest rate will not be 7%, it will be 48%. And that is the debt trap that in which farmers are there. And one bad season for them, and those sharks then come for collection, and that's where we see a lot of these issues of farmer suicides, because they're not able to pay those money lenders at 48%, which is where we feel that a solution like this, which can inform bankers on the risk profile of farmers, where they can take better decisions, that can really solve this problem of the debt cycle that many of our farmers in India are in.
But here we sound like there's no information channel to the farmers, but it seems to me the banks have the local presence, right? If they're giving me my loan, then we can have that conversation. They can be the information channel.
Communication channels are absolutely great these days. He has a helpline 1550. He has all the television channels in the world. There are special agricultural programs. Are you not using those channels to really reach the farmers quickly? Because these are absolutely, there is the total exposure. Except that the farmers may not be looking at the agricultural channel and maybe looking more at the soap and whatever, the Kapil Sharma show or whatever.
No, so okay, so there are two aspects. One is, and I'll keep this very quick. See, what happens is, data in general is always available. Okay, it's all about what gets penetrated at a farmer level. Now, is it that the farmer doesn't get information about weather stress? That may not be the case. He gets information about a lot of weather stress, but the granularity is never at his plot level. A state may declare or government may declare that rainfall is going to happen, as he was rightly mentioning. There is an average rainfall data that has been given. Now, we would look at a state of Maharashtra which has very good rainfall across the year. But does it mean that a state like Vidarbha would have equal amount of rain versus what state, a region like Vidarbha would have equal amount of rain, which we would look at states like, districts like Satara, Sangli, Kolhapur. Now, this dispersed information is very critical to the farmer. Typically, for a farmer to consume that data becomes very challenging. Second is, because of the non-granularity of the information. Second is typically, it's not that the intent is not to work with the farmer or not provide him with the information. Today, banks, financial institutions want to get into an position because it's mandated, as well as there is a willingness to fund. But obviously, you need to have your NPAs on the lower side. Now, this new to credit customers, which have to be lent, are still missing from the policy side. If you walk into a bank today, what every bank will say is that, okay, you don't have a 650 CIBIL. I may not have from a policy point of view, I don't know how I'm going to fund you. That's a governed process that is there internally. And that's where CRISIL and SatSure are trying to bring that alternative data set. Maybe he would have a -1 rating, which is typically the use case. Can they look at another data source to take an informed decision to lend to that farmer? See, Government of India and banks, typically if you go and talk to them, you cannot force collection as a process onto them. If there is a waiver, you cannot do much about it. If there is a natural calamity, the insurance would take its front. But the farmers who are under stress are not the ones who have been lent by financial institutions. They are more from the loan sharks who have been lending them. That's the stress that is resulting into that. Now, why would a farmer not be able to go to a bank? Maybe he doesn't own a land. He is doing contractual farming. Maybe he's still not part of the regular funding, the regular data process where there is a negative score for him when it comes to CIBIL. Now that's where we are trying to bring in that particular process by saying that, okay, he is a farmer, the land that he's been growing on has been doing really well, or the village that he's part of, the default percentage over there is very less, or they have done really good crops which have done a really good which really have a good income potential. So here is my data for you to take an informed decision. So maybe this is the first step that we both have taken very recently, with a thought that maybe in a year or two, those unpenetrated 34% of farmers, we can reach out to each one of them, whether they are cotton farmers or whether they are very smallholder farmers doing any crop, and try to bring that difference. We are not there. There is a long way to go, but definitely we should see a difference very soon.
Okay, pretty good discussion. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I think we went pretty deep into the weeds on this one, so it was I find it very interesting. Yeah, we could go into farm monitoring information, all sorts of information products. That's for another panel. Now it's time to actually go eat those tomatoes after talking about them. I'll let you do the closing.
As rightly said, it was a very informative session. I wish we had more ears to it to know all the ground realities. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all the dignitaries there for taking out time and attending and making it successful. Now we would head for lunch. We all will resume for the next session by 2:30. VIPs and speakers can move to OWEL, and delegates are most welcome here so that smoothly we can resume back for the next sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists and this chair.